Hello and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Peel. Now here are the stories making headlines beyond the continent. We begin with the World Economic Forum, where U.S. President Donald Trump told world business leaders to manufacture in the United States or face tariffs. This comes in his first major speech to global leaders since returning to the White House this week. Trump said on Thursday, speaking remotely to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. In his speech, he added that he believed lower oil prices would help end war in Ukraine instantly. The U.S. president also said the world has witnessed the revolution of common sense in the last 72 hours since he took office. And for more on this, I'm joined by our international correspondent, Afia Hagen. Afia, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Afia, please, if you will, tell us what were the main takeaways from Trump's address to Davos?
Well, you had that line on the make products in the US, very much aligned with Make America Great Again. He also urged Saudi Arabia to increase its investments in the US to $1 trillion. He also said he plans a major intervention in the oil market, again asking Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. In addition to that, he was talking about the Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Initially, he had said upon taking office, he would be able to end the war between Ukraine and Russia in 24 hours. It's been 4 days, and that hasn't happened yet. But he said that the war is an absolute killing field, and nobody wants to see these scenes that he said have not been seen since World War II. He's promised to cut the corporate tax rate in the US to 15% for businesses that manufacture in the United States, very much in line with that line of come to America and make your goods. He criticized the European Union, saying that its tariff and taxes were too high. And he's been talking about Canada again and saying that Canada could become a state of the United States and saying that the US doesn't need Canada's cars or lumber.
Afia, tell you what, let's take a look at that remark from Donald Trump, and then I'll come back to ask you further questions on his speech.
Every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. What the world has witnessed in the past 72 hours is nothing less than a revolution of common sense. Our country will soon be stronger, wealthier, and more united than ever before, and the entire planet will be more peaceful and prosperous as a result of this incredible momentum and what we're doing and going to do.
Afia, we heard it there. Trump started with a very lofty speech, and he had very caustic remarks for people in past administration. What has been the reaction to his speech since?
Well, Davos is a very, very busy event. It's a very, very busy conference. And from what I'm hearing on the ground there, not everybody actually was in attendance to that speech. Some people felt that they could take it or leave it. So we're not sure that maybe President Trump got the absolutely captivated audience that he wanted. In the room where the speech was being broadcast to, there were audible gasps in that room when people heard Trump's remarks on Canada, when Trump said that Canada could become part of the United States and that the United States didn't need its cars on lumber. People audibly and visibly shocked that he's reiterating that sentiment.
I guess that's the reaction he was going for. But what can we expect for the rest of day 4 of Trump's presidency?
Well, it's been a frenetic start to his presidency, absolutely. It's day 4. It feels like maybe it's 6 months in. But back in the US on Capitol Hill, the Senate is continuing to push through Trump's nominees in the confirmation process. So there's expected to be a procedural vote also on Pete Hegseth's nomination for Defense Secretary. Remember, his hearing actually took place a week ago today. The Agricultural, Nutrition and Forestry Committee is also holding a hearing on Trump's nominee for the Department of Agriculture, that's Brooke Rollins. He also has some other meetings taking place today. He's going to sign an executive order at 7:30 GMT. We're not sure what that one is. And then he has a call with the president of El Salvador, that's Bukele, someone who's been a real supporter of Trump in the past. And later on, Trump is going to record a video message and take part in a swearing in for senior staff later on today. So another busy day in day 4 of the Trump presidency.
Busy indeed, hitting the ground running. Thank you very much, Afia, for giving us your time, as always. Thank you. Now, in the meantime, President Donald Trump promised to end the war between the Ukraine and Russia in his first 24 hours in office. 4 days into his presidency, this hasn't happened. But Trump has threatened sanctions against Russia if the war doesn't end soon. For News Central, international correspondent Afia Hagen has more.
President Donald Trump has threatened to levy steep tariffs and additional sanctions against Russia if Vladimir Putin doesn't halt the conflict in Ukraine. Trump has previously claimed he could broker a resolution to Russia's large-scale invasion, which began in February 2022, within 24 hours.
You've called for a ceasefire in Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin doesn't come to the table to negotiate with you, will you put additional sanctions on Russia?
Sounds likely.
And do you think that the war should be frozen currently along
The war should have never
lines?
started. If you had a competent president, which you didn't, the war wouldn't have happened. The war in Ukraine would have never happened if I were president.
Moscow is yet to issue a formal response to these statements, though high-ranking officials have recently indicated there exists a brief window of opportunity to engage with the new US leadership. Putin has consistently expressed willingness to pursue diplomatic solutions to the conflict, which initially erupted in 2014, but insists Ukraine must acknowledge Russian territorial acquisitions, currently comprising roughly 20% of Ukrainian soil. He also maintains his opposition to Ukraine's potential NATO membership, the Western Military Coalition. Ukraine remains steadfast against territorial concessions, though President Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged the possibility of temporary compromises regarding currently occupied regions. Trump announced plans to communicate with Putin very shortly and indicated he would likely implement additional sanctions if the Russian president refused negotiations. His subsequent Truth Social post expanded on this stance and planning to do Russia with its struggling economy and President Putin an enormous favour, he declared. Trump hasn't detailed the timing or targets of potential economic sanctions. Russian goods entering the US have dropped dramatically since 2022, with numerous strict limitations currently enforced. Meanwhile, we await the much-anticipated Trump-Putin meeting and whether Trump can really be the president to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagen.
In the meantime, hundreds of migrants stranded in southern Mexico have opted to seek refuge in the country following U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to cancel a program that allowed them to obtain asylum. Many of them from Latin American countries had already scheduled or were looking for appointments to request asylum through the CBP on mobile app, but the platform was disabled as soon as Trump took office last Monday. Reluctant to return to their places of origin, where they fled poverty, violence, or political persecution, hundreds began to request protection from Mexico in the city of Tapachula.
CBP1 se canceló y lo que vamos a hacer ahora es hacer un proceso con Comar, solicitar refugio aquí, porque igual muchas personas de nosotros como migrantes no queremos regresar a nuestro país y estamos haciendo el proceso para quedarnos aquí en México. La verdad que México nos ha tratado muy bien. En mi caso, hablo a lo personal, México me ha tratado muy bien, me ha tendido la mano.
Esperar, pedir asilo a México, esperar a ver qué, como te digo, esperar a ver qué solución da la nueva administración del gobierno de Donald Trump. Lo que pasa es que yo no puedo regresar así como tal a mi país porque yo soy perseguido político. Yo tengo problemas allá con la política y regresar a mi país es morir.
La idea inicial era llegar a los Estados Unidos, pero México es un gran país. Aquí se puede vivir, lo que no tenemos en nuestro país, aquí se puede vivir bien. Y si no queda la opción de llegar a los Estados Unidos, que fue la primera idea, entonces sí existe la posibilidad de quedarnos en México.
And away from that now, Hungarian Foreign Affairs Minister Peter Szijjártó has reaffirmed his nation's strong support for Israel in a press conference. The minister made this known while hosting Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister Eli Cohen in Budapest. In his speech, Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister Cohen made comments on future Israeli security, saying the country will not allow another October 7th on any front.
Azt is, hogy az elmúlt időszakban mind az ENSZ, mind az Európai Unió fórumain egy rendkívül ellenséges, kiegyensúlyozatlan, elfogult megközelítés uralkodott Izraellel szemben. Magyarország a maga súlyával, a maga eszközeivel ezt mindig ellenezte. Azt gondolom, hogy ez is része annak a riasztó tendenciának, amely ilyen egyfajta modernkori antiszemitizmus formájában jelenik meg. Sajnos az európai kontinensen is, részben a tömeges illegális migráció egyik következményeként.
Israel is committed to securing the release of all the hostages within the framework for the release of the hostages. Israel is paying a heavy price for its commitment to its values and mutual responsibility. This is the essence of the Jewish state. Hezbollah and Iran have been weakened. It is important. This contributed to the fall of Assad's regime as well. The Iranian axis had suffered major blows. Israel is closely monitoring developments in these arenas and is adopting a realistic approach to safeguard its security. We will not allow another October 7 on any front.
We're going to a short break now. When we return, UK child stabbing spree killer gets life in custody for murder of 3 young girls. Listen more after this timeout. Welcome back. Now, in Germany, the day after 2 people killed in a knife attack in the Bavarian town of Aschenberg, locals come to lay flowers, light candles, or just gather their thoughts. Now, the victims of the attack, which targeted a play school, a group in a public park, were a 2-year-old child and a 41-year-old male passerby who died while trying to shield other children. 3 more people were wounded. Meanwhile, German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser says that further investigation must now quickly show why the perpetrator was still in Germany after police arrested an Afghan suspect near the scene.
Die weitere Aufklärung muss jetzt schnell zeigen, warum dieser Täter noch in Deutschland war und wie mit ihm trotz seiner vorherigen Gewalttaten durch die Polizei und Justiz vor Ort umgegangen wurde. Die bayerischen Behörden müssen erklären, warum der Täter trotz mehrfacher Gewaltdelikte noch auf freiem Fuß war. Offenbar sind in Bayern dort auch einige Dinge schiefgelaufen. Deshalb finde ich jetzt auch die Reaktion der Bayern befremdlich.
And in a related development, a British judge has sentenced the UK teenager to life in custody for the murder of 3 young girls in a stabbing spree last year that sparked the country's worst riots in over a decade. Judge Julian Goose told the court in Liverpool that it is highly likely that the knife attacker will never be released. The families of children killed and wounded by a teenager in the UK knife rampage wept in court Thursday as they relieved the chilling details of a frenzied attack on a girls' dance class. After his arrest, police found violent content on Axel Rukadubana's device, including images of dead bodies, victims of torture, beheadings, cartoons depicting killing, violence, and rape, or which insulted or mocked different religions.
I'm sure that Rukadubana had a settled and determined intention to carry out these offences, and that had he been able to, he would have killed each and every child, all 26 of them, as well as any adults who got in his way. It was only because some managed to escape that prevented many more from being murdered. He was arrested, taken into custody, and whilst Rukadubana did not say anything in his police interviews, he did make unsolicited comments which are deeply disturbing, including, quote, "I'm glad to see those kids are dead. It makes me happy," close quote, and, quote, "It's a good thing those children are dead," close quote.
Moving on, Ireland's incoming Prime Minister, Michael Martin, pledges to strengthen ties with Europe, the US, and of course the UK, after the country's parliament elected him as the new leader. The Irish Parliament on Thursday backed Michael Martin to become the country's next Prime Minister, a day after a bitter row had delayed the vote. Martin was appointed along with government ministers after overnight talks to break the deadlock over speaking rights. The experienced 64-year-old, whose centre-right Fianna Fáil won most seats at a general election in November, had steered the formation of a three-way centrist coalition.
It's a profound honour to be nominated to serve as head of the government in a free, democratic and diverse republic. Today, I am deeply conscious of the democratic tradition which our country has developed over more than a century. We should never take for granted the freedoms and opportunities secured for us by the generations who sat here before us and by the men and women who fought and campaigned for the establishment of Dáil Éireann. I believe in the good faith of those who seek to serve their communities in elective office. And I believe that politics remains a force for good, a force for positive change. I hope that we can have a cooperative Oireachtas in the coming years, where we try to emphasise positive discussion. For my part, I intend to remain open to constructive ideas from deputies from all parts of the House.
Now, in the Middle East, Sana'a residents have expressed their support for Houthis after the U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order to once again designate the Iran-backed rebels a foreign terrorist organization. When the former president took over from his predecessor in 2021, he removed the designation that had been signed near the end of his first term. Joe Biden's move came in response to concerns from aid groups that they would need to pull out of Yemen as they are obliged to deal with the rebels, who are effectively the government in vast areas, including the capital, Sana'a. But weeks after the war in the Gaza Strip broke out on the 7th of October 2023, the Houthis began launching attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden in what they said was support for the Palestinians.
هو ليس يعني غريبا عليه أن يصدر مثل هكذا قرارات يعني بحق من يقوم بمناهضة سياسته، لأنه هو يريد من دول المنطقة ومن شعوب المنطقة أن تبقى خاضعة له مضيعة له. فنحن لو يصنفونا ولو عملوا ما عملوا نحن صامدين وثابتين ثبوت الجبال الرواسي وشامخين. أمريكا وإسرائيل هي أم الإرهاب، أما إحنا هنا أمة مقاتلة في سبيل الله برعاية السيد المولى عبد الملك بدر الدين الحوثي يحفظه الله. نقول لهم اللي يصنفونا إرهابيين أنه الإرهابي هو القتال، قتال الأطفال وقتال النساء، محرب البيوت فوق الأطفال وأهلها، هو الإرهابي هو، ولا ما إحنا أمة قرآنية، ما إحنا إرهابيين نرهب.
The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor says he was seeking arrest warrants against senior Taliban leaders in Afghanistan over the prosecution of women. Karim Khan said there were reasonable grounds to suspect that Supreme Leader and Chief Justice Abdul Hakim Haqqani bear criminal responsibility for the crime against humanity of prosecution on gender grounds. ICC judge will now consider Khan's application before deciding whether to issue an arrest warrant, a process that could take weeks or even months.
Today, I can announce that my office has filed 2 applications for warrants of arrest before Pretrial Chamber 2 of the International Criminal Court in the situation in Afghanistan. After a thorough investigation, and on the basis of evidence collected, my office submits that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the supreme leader of the Taliban, Haibatullah Akhundzada, and the Chief Justice of the so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Abdul Hakim Haqqani, bear criminal responsibility for the crime against humanity of persecution on gender grounds under Article 71H of the Rome Statute. My office has concluded that these two Afghan nationals are criminally responsible for persecuting Afghan girls and women, as well as persons whom the Taliban perceived are not conforming with their ideological expectations of gender identity or expression.
In Asia, South Korean investigators have recommended that impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol be charged with insurrection and abuse of power. This follows the conclusion of a 51-day probe by the Corruption Investigation Office into Yoon's ill-fated declaration of martial law on 3rd of December. The CIO handed prosecutors the findings of their investigation, which alleged Yoon conspired with his former defense minister and other military commanders to suspend civilian rule and disrupt the constitutional order.
헌법상의 정당한 권한인 비상대권인 계엄 선포를 한 것이 내란죄로 몰려서 여러 가지 어려운 상황을 겪고 있습니다. 대통령이 그리는 계엄과 장관이 그리는 계엄은 다를 수 있습니다. 그리고 장관이 그리는 계엄과 밑에 실제 현장에서 뛰는 사령관 군인들과 경찰이 또 그리는 계엄이 다릅니다. 그리고 대통령이 장관에게 지시한 사항과 장관이 그 밑에 군인들에게 지시한 사항이 또 다릅니다. 그 과정에서 얼마든지 약간의 의견 차이가 있을 수 있는 겁니다. 끌어내라, 체포해라는 지시가 있었다고 하는데 어디에서도 그런 흔적이 보이지 않습니다. 여러분들도 화면을 다 봤을 겁니다. 생중계되는 군인들이 거기서
And that's all on Beyond the Continent. To remember, you can watch News Central live on DSTV Channel 422, Star Times Channel 274, AVO TV, and of course on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.